Good morning, folks, and thank you very much for inviting me. So, as Michael said, I'm sort of a hybrid. I'm part chief exec. You should take the phone down here. I'm part chief executive and I'm part researcher. So I try and take a research-focused view of the world and then actually build stuff out of it. And I was really interested in the leadership video that Steve just put up, because I think this point about the need for the first follower and the need to create movements rather than sort of strong structures of leadership is really pertinent right now. Because we've got a lot of innovation going on, a lot of really important innovation going on, but at the same time, we've got a lot of people doing it in a hero kind of way. We've got a lot of people saying, no, I've got the solution, I've got the way to solve this, rather than people actually collaborating, really collaborating. And I guess that's a theme I want to pick up as I'm speaking to you. I think the other thing I just wanted to kind of like this, so like two kind of like disclaimer type things. So one is that I'm really sorry, because I only just finished my PhD, so I have to tell everybody I finished it, because lots of people didn't think I'd manage it. And so I sometimes get a bit researchy, so if I do that, Michael will stop me with some kind of like polite cough, which is you've gone off on one. And the other thing is I'm curious C on Twitter, so if you're really not enjoying my presentation, what you can do is you can just frantically populate the back channel and then just humiliate me when I sit down. So have at it, curious C on Twitter. So I became fascinated by technology about, well, I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but nearly 20 years ago, when I was working at London Business School, and I suddenly realised that the fact that we were connected to SuperJana and to the wider global internet meant that I didn't have to stand by the fax machine for hours faxing student applications to Stanford. And it was just like, well, this is very cool, because I hate the fax machine and it's a good thing, it's gone. But I moved from that kind of like, this is useful feeling, to starting to look at how can online community support learning environments. So I've always been really interested in the social aspects of technology, because I think that if you take the human out of the tech, then you almost certainly make the situation worse, not better. And there's a big question at the moment about digital leadership, which is how do we make sure we keep the human in it? And I think at this border between technology and society, which is where I tend to situate myself, I think there's a really interesting perspective about some very big social changes which are happening in society. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say we're at a moment which is as pivotal as the Industrial Revolution was. We just don't know what's coming next. And I think that digital leadership, to some extent, is about how do we traverse not just those practical issues of how do you change the infrastructure and the nature of your society, but how do we make sure that we do it with humanity and with integrity. Because there are a lot of moral questions here to be answered, as well as their technical problems to be solved. And I don't think that it's inappropriate to be talking to you as a group of technologists about some of those moral choices that you've got to make. I think, if you look at the news today, let's talk about the difference between surveillance and participation. The way in which we choose to develop our systems around data collection and data management basically set the nature of the relationship between the citizen and the state, or just between the individual and a big corporate. So as you're designing these solutions, you can take a technocratic view of the world. You can say, I'm just building tech, or you can actually say, I'm shaping the future. And I think if you take the fact that you're shaping the future, there are even greater responsibilities here and opportunities, and I think it's a very exciting time. I think, so when we talk about digital leaders, I think, and it's a, so I spend a lot of time working with senior management teams, and I'm often brought in as a crazy digital lady to kind of, because we've been working with local government and bits of government for a long time, and so we have a track record at Public Eye and sort of what we've been doing for delivering a service which people actually turn out find very useful. And then I've been doing this wider research. So I often end up talking to a senior team and they're going, what about this digital stuff? And I guess the first thing I want to say about digital leadership is that I think we have to have, at this point, zero tolerance for digital illiteracy around the top table. I don't think that we can face the challenges, particularly that government faces, particularly that local government are facing, without digital literacy at the top table. But what that means is not necessarily technology. And that's what I want to explore a little bit. Because I think that, real leadership is about the ability not just to react to change, but to shape it against those moral parameters, those ethical considerations about this is how I think the future ought to be. And I think if we retain the definition of digital as being technology, I think we've missed the point of connection, which is why so many people are excited about this. But also we risk going down a technocratic route, which means we lose the human. I think a number of different, as I'm out and about in the world, I think there are a number of different tribes who are owning the word digital at the moment. And part of the problem here may be that those tribes aren't collaborating with each other. So I'm going to kind of like lay out what some of these tribes, and I'd be quite interested if people either identify themselves or realise that the person who they thought they were trying to explain the clouds to, actually, if you understand their tribe, you can actually explain it to them a little bit better. So the first group, there's the shiny stuff people. The people who don't care what it is, but it's shiny and they want it. Now, I have to confess, I'm a bit of a shiny stuff person myself. Is anybody else desperate to get a new MacBook, a new iPad Air? Yeah, okay. Okay. It's just okay. The shiny stuff people. It's like a disease, but the shiny stuff people often they don't really think through the consequences, but they see it, they want it, they buy it, or they use it, or they demand it. They demand that somebody procures it for them. Dangerous group, the shiny stuff people. Anybody who works with me will definitely agree. The shiny stuff people can be dangerous. On the other hand of that, there's a group of people who are all about sort of infrastructure. So for whom digital is about, we've got to get the right broadband, we've got to get 4G, we've got to figure out how we're getting people connected. Now, I like these people when they also think about digital exclusion, because my personal view is that digital exclusion is another moral issue. If this is going to be a world which is largely mediated via technology and we have people unable to connect to it, is we should be taking this back to our places as a moral issue, as something which we cannot ignore, because this is just a signaller for multiple forms of deprivation. However, that's a kind of like a personal view, and I'm quite interested in people's views on that. But there's this other tribe which are about if we get the plumbing right, the stuff will follow. They're related to, but not quite the same as if we get the architecture right, the rest will follow. So there are people who come to, okay, digital is really about, we need to think about cloud, we need to think about distributed services, we need to think about software as a service. If we get the architecture, which may sit on this infrastructure right, then we've got the solution. And they're useful people to have around, but they do get quite kind of obsessive about their architecture. They always think about the things that they're building on it. They also kind of like, I sometimes find the architecture people, they'll go off on one which is that they'll build you such an elegant architecture, but never actually think that you want them to finish it as well, which is another danger. Okay, there's another group, and I think that this is actually the tribe which, in my experience, you often fall into, Socitm, which is the digital by default channel shift tribe. Which is that we can make everything better by putting it online and making it a little bit more efficient, or a lot more efficient. So the digital by default tribe is saying, actually, I've been right for my entire career, 20 years in technology, make it digital by default, we're fine. So they're a whole different tribe, and the danger of, and to be honest, around efficiency, they're right, digital by default does make sense. Where you run into danger with that is that actually there's a risk of lipstick on a pig, which is because sometimes the digital by default strategy, in my experience, is the technologists taking hold of the thing that really does need to be done, which is greater use of technology, but not actually forcing the organisation or being allowed to do the service redesign that actually really unlocks that potential. So digital by default on its own is a dangerous tribe, because what it doesn't do is unlock the different ways of thinking. And the different ways of thinking is another tribe. You've got your design thinkers, your radical service redesigners. They're the people who are really interested in the massively disruptive effects which technology and digital can have. The people who are sitting there thinking about housing and couch surfing in the same headspace. The people who are thinking about actually how can we massively disrupt this model and make it better. Now, I think that we need that kind of thinking, but it needs to be one tribe as part of many. I think service redesign and design thinking is going to be critical to creating the kind of experiences that we're going to want to have in the future, but it can't be in isolation. So there's another tribe as well, which I think is the big data tribe. So the tribe and the big data tribe are close friends with the behavioural economists and also the kind of the big, sort of the open data folks. The big data tribe are very interested in demand management. Actually, if we know enough about people, can we change their needs? Can we change the environment in which they're operating? And I think that there's some very interesting stuff in that space, and certainly we are in a big data world. I'm going to argue in a second that actually without the skills to deal with big data, then you're kind of like, you're holed under the waterline. But it's another tribe, this is a tribe that actually is almost most likely to have lost the human, because they're seeing big data sets and they're not always seeing individuals. So there are two other tribes, and the sort of one of these tribes are the people who you probably find really annoying, because they're the social innovation tribe, who don't really necessarily understand the technology, but are absolutely convinced it can change the world. Now they might be right, but they're very difficult for real technologists to interface with, because the social innovation tribe, they're kind of like a combination of the shiny thing and a Labrador puppy, which is like, you know who I'm talking about. They're people who've got an amazing world vision, perhaps, but don't always have the depth of knowledge about the environment to bring it off. Sometimes they do, and they're the ones I think you need to watch. There's a final tribe, and I've got the tribe, this is kind of like speaker's privilege. The final tribe is my tribe. So a tribe about social change. About that actually that digital is about the way in which we can world build for the future, and that it's about the way in which this changes the relationship between people. And it's that social change place where I come from, which is about where one of the underpinning ideas and values is the fact that we've shifted from hierarchical power to networked power, and that's actually the change in behaviour that we're chasing here, and that we most need to respond to. I'd say I'm sort of being aware of all the other tribes. For me, the significant thing about digital, in its entirety rather than its technology definition, is its ability to shift relationships, to shift the way in which we interact with other people. And that can be sometimes masked as a communications change, because there is a definite change to the way we're communicating, but you have to draw a distinction between communication changes and actual changes in relationship patterns. And as a sociologist, I would argue that that's what we're seeing. So this is a good example about the kind of thing you can have a pop at me on Twitter now, because it is popping up on my iPad as well. It's only Steve really who's having a go. So feel free. But so have to think about it. Digital means different things to different people. And while we're talking about this need for the first follower and the need for collaborative leadership, is actually, if you don't have an appreciation of which tribe you come from and an appreciation of the other tribes, actually you're always just going to be trying to own the words digital rather than actually coming up with a whole which is greater than the sum of the parts. So figure out which tribe you're in and actually have some sympathy, test a little bit. When that person is banging on at you about digital and you're there going, I don't think they know what they're talking about, try and figure out what tribe they're in. So I think, though, that there are some distinct skills, though, that come with this, which, when I talk about the need for digital literacy around the top table, I think these are the kind of skills that we need to be thinking about. And the first one is, actually, you need to have an awareness of all of those tribes. Because if you're not, if your senior leaders if your leaders don't have an awareness of all those tribes, they're in danger of finding a guru. So they find a guru from one of those tribes, and as a result, because they don't know the stuff themselves, is that they end up following one of those tribes and not being aware of the others. So they follow the service redesign guru, and as a result, they don't really think about big data. They follow the big data guru, and they don't really think about social change. If to be a digital leader, I think you have to have an awareness of all of these tribes. I think that one of the qualities which we need to design into our leaders and design into our leadership development programs is around an ability to learn about this stuff. At the moment, I think that people who are not technologists like yourselves are very, very nervous about learning about digital. And if you don't have an ability to learn, you don't have the ability to survive in this environment, because it will constantly change. So where in other professions you can get to a point of professional expertise where you can proceed into the higher ranks of management, anything to do with digital has to be on a perpetual learning curve. And also, you have to be able to experiment and test things and try things out for yourself. So if you don't have that kind of mindset, I don't think you do well with you're not a digital leader. I think that you need to have made that shift in your mind from the inbox of one in, one out, individual bits of information, to big data thinking. You need to understand about sampling things rather than counting things. You need to understand about reach rather than about volume. And you need to understand how you commission the right information from the data that you've now got available, rather than just asking for a report. And in fact, you probably shouldn't be asking for a report, you should be asking for a dashboard. So I think just having that awareness that your mind has to have made that flip, which is, I kind of understand there's way more stuff out there than I can ever possibly deal with, and you have to have developed your own coping strategy, as well as the ability to commission your organisation to give you the information that you need. I think you also have to be tolerant of the perpetual beta. We just have to get over it. We're never going to finish anything ever again. Never. And that's a good thing. You know, in an unfixed context, in a world which is constantly changing, which you're trying to shape, nothing will ever be finished. Change is perpetual. The system is in perpetual beta. And I think that's linked very, very strongly to this ability to learn and this ability to exist in a much less fixed context, which is kind of connected to that. If you can accept the perpetual beta, then you're always asking about how do we make it better. If you're actually thinking you're going to finish something, is how can we make it okay? Perpetual beta is about continual improvement. I think we also need to make sure, though, that they've got this appreciation of some of the ideas of co-design. I think is that the idea that you're going to have that hierarchical leadership imposition of a solution, that's just never going to happen again, I don't think. And because I think that people's networked behaviours means that the resistance to change, which as technologists we've always had to wrestle with, is now insurmountable. There are so many ways for people to resist change that if we don't use co-design approaches, we will never get our solutions adopted. And I think we have to stop thinking that that's just a huge pain in the arse, and we have to start thinking about that's a tremendous opportunity for creativity. But if you don't have the principles of co-design, you don't understand how this works, then actually that's another way in which a leader can fail, and it's another reason why this is one of the qualities of digital leadership. I've got two other qualities of digital leadership. One is about being human in the tech, because I think to be a digital leader you need to have that appreciation that this is my favourite word, I'm warning you, disintermediation, the removal of unnecessary layers between the individual and the action that they're trying to commit. The disintermediation of this stuff means that we should be thinking about the very human connection which leaders should be able to make directly to the people who they're affecting. If we look at a networked movement as distinct from a hierarchical movement, the distance of travel between the leader and any of those followers is so much shorter. And so actually being human and being connected is really important. The last quality, and this kind of takes us into the kind of the sort of the what next kind of section, which is like the third slide of my kind of like mad mind map, which I'm speaking from, is about relevance. One of the things that, there are lots and lots of qualities about sort of the social web, the network society, which I think that as in traditional leadership practice you're going to have to address anyway. And one of those is about openness. Is that I think that we're all going to be required to think in public in this world. I think we're going to be required to think in public for many reasons. One is that I don't think that people will trust you unless they understand the way you think. I don't think that it's going to be possible to hide. I think we've lost the ability for discretion. I think that may be a bad thing, but it's very difficult to hold something in and not have at least part of your thinking out in public. So if you don't actually take the whole of your thinking out in public, you're going to be misinterpreted. But the other thing is that networks feed on perpetual relevance. If you're not making a contribution to the network, then you're not relevant to that network. And where that network is open and digital and active is that you have to be constantly earning your place in that. And that is really, really hard work unless we can figure out how to flip some of our leadership skills to actually natively behave in that kind of way. When I think about being relevant, is that I think it's about thinking in public in a way which directly connects you to your people, to your network, to the people that you're trying to lead. Because I think if you fail to do that, you've failed to connect to a lot of people. You've failed to gain that trust, and you've probably failed to get the kind of traction and speed that you need to make change happen. So I think it's really interesting to think about you guys, because technologists are absolutely pivotal to what comes next. Is that if we're going to have a more digital and networked society, the people who understand how the tech, how the new train system works, and the way that the Victorians put infrastructure in, you understand the bits and bytes that we're building our future on. But you don't have a monopoly on it, and I think that's the dilemma there. Is you can't have a monopoly on it because digital is about more than the technology. And one of the things, and this is kind of like it's why it's kind of a slightly dangerous privilege to be standing here, is one of my observations is that many technologists, many ICT folks, are as likely to be gatekeepers as they are to be door openers. And that you guard your information, you guard your knowledge very tightly. Partly, and I see this in my own team, so I don't know if Aidy's about here, because he could, so you can tell them whether or not it's true, is that you can see the joy, the twinned frustration of the expert trying to explain something which is your intellectual bread and butter to a technological numpty. And trying to do it again and again until finally maybe they understand it. But also is that I've always thought that technology is a very creative space, and there's an arrogance that comes with that. And so one of the reasons I was delighted to be asked this, but now slightly glad I'm near the door, is that I think that you have to consider: are you a door opener or are you a gatekeeper? Because if you're not a door opener, then you're not helping that literacy get to the top table. I think you need to ask yourselves in the same vein about whether or not you're actually part of this future building, or whether or not you're actually making the status quo more efficient. Now, I'm kind of in a radical change. In the technology adoption curve, I'm normally in the pioneer space. So sometimes I might relax in the kind of like the early adopter zone, but I tend to be on the bottom of that chart. However, I think that if you're not in that space trying to actually make things different, I think you're both missing an opportunity. And I think particularly in local governments, you're letting your organisation all down, because there is. I have not spoken to anybody for some time who believes that just efficiency is going to get us out of the hole that we're in financially. So if you're not thinking about change, if you're only thinking about efficiency, then you're not actually doing a good enough job. And I think that's harsh but fair. I think that the question is that are you respecting the digital tribes who aren't technologists? So are you actually able to form the effective relationships that they need from you as experts in order to put the bits and bytes into some of this tribal thinking? So the senior manager who really understands behaviour change and really wants to put something into play in their service, are you helping them? Are you giving them the backup that they need? Or actually are you saying, leave it to us because we're the experts here? And I think that if you're not able to form those relationships with the professions who need to use this stuff but are not technologists, we're also missing that digital literacy point, that digital literacy at the top table point. So I guess the question for me is that, are you changing? Because if we think about sort of what I've been saying, we're in a period of social change, we're in a period of future shaping, we're in a period of world building. And we're in a world where a digital leader, any kind of leader, has to be up for the perpetual beta. So as you're here for your annual conference for a couple of days, I think you need to be thinking about, are you changing? And are you taking this stuff as far as it can actually go? Because if you're not, I think we're never going to achieve that question about digital literacy at the top table. We're never going to get to that point where we're really using this stuff to change our society. So digital leadership is still leadership. You know, all of the stuff that's in those kind of books you buy at airports is still relevant, but the skills and the building blocks are slightly different. But remember, you know, this stuff is only technology. Actually, it's what we do with it. It's the tribes that matter. It's the people that matter. So when you're working through these questions, think about the future that you're trying to shape, and think about the humans that you're trying to shape it for. I really hope you have a fantastic conference, because I think you've got such a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. And I look forward to reading whether or not you like the speech on Twitter. Thank you.